There is a kind of hunger that no food can satisfy, a thirst that no drink can quench, a longing that no achievement, no possession, no embrace can ever truly fulfill. It hides beneath our daily routines, disguised as harmless habits, but in certain lives it becomes something else. It becomes an ache so relentless, so unbearable, that it pushes a person toward the very things that will destroy them. This is the paradox of addiction. And for Carl Jung, it was never simply about the substance or the behavior. It was about the soul. To Jung, addiction is not merely a failure of self-control. It is not weakness. It is a cry from the depths of the unconscious, a desperate attempt to find what was lost. And for many, that lost thing is not a person, not an object, not even a clear memory. It is a lost connection with the self, the wholeness at the center of our being. Jung believed that we are born oriented toward this center. It is the axis around which our psyche turns, the source of meaning, the ground of our existence. But life, with its wounds, its traumas, its rejections, can sever that connection, and when that happens, the human being will seek substitutes. Sometimes those substitutes are noble: art, philosophy, the pursuit of knowledge. Other times they are destructive: alcohol, narcotics, compulsive sex, endless distractions. This is what Jung meant by spiritus contra spiritum, the false spirit in opposition to the true spirit. When the real spirit is absent, we summon a counterfeit. The bottle becomes the chalice, the needle becomes the ritual, the high becomes the imitation of transcendence. Why? Because the psyche cannot live without the sacred, even if the sacred it finds is poisoned. Many people see addiction as the search for pleasure. Jung saw it as the search for transformation. The addict is not only trying to escape pain, they are at some level trying to touch the infinite. Tragedy is that the doorway they choose only leads them deeper into the labyrinth. He understood this not as an abstract theory, but through his work with real people. Again and again he saw the same truth. Behind the compulsion was a longing, behind the longing was an emptiness, and behind that emptiness was a disconnection from the self. In the letter he wrote to Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, Jung was clear. The craving for alcohol was, in many cases, the equivalent, on a low level, of the spiritual thirst for wholeness, for union with God. But when that thirst is misunderstood, it leads not to awakening but to ruin. You can see this if you look closely at the cycle of addiction. It begins with an absence, a hole in the center of one's being. Then comes the discovery of something that fills it, temporarily. The first drink, the first high, the first rush of the compulsive act. For a moment the pain quiets, the hunger fades, the world becomes tolerable. But soon the relief fades, and the hunger returns stronger than before, and the person is left chasing the memory of that first relief, never realizing that the very thing they grasp is widening the emptiness. Jung would say that this is the unconscious trying to heal itself, but doing so blindly, without guidance. The addict is a seeker wandering in the dark, holding a torch that burns them as much as it lights their way. In Jung's psychology, the path back is not about sheer willpower, nor about simply removing the substance. It is about restoring the lost connection with the self, and that is not a small task. It is, in fact, the work of a lifetime. To do this requires what Jung called individuation, the process of integrating all the parts of the psyche, even the ones we would rather deny, especially those, because what we push away, our shame, our rage, our grief, does not vanish. It gathers in the dark, in what Jung called the shadow. and the shadow will find its way into our lives, if not through conscious integration, then through unconscious compulsion, often through addiction. The shadow is not evil in itself. It is simply the part of us that was never allowed into the light. But the longer it remains hidden, the more power it has over us. Addiction, in many cases, is the shadow's voice, demanding to be heard, no matter the cost. When we numb ourselves, when we repeat the compulsive act, we are often trying to silence that voice. But in doing so, we only make it louder. The unconscious will not be ignored. Jung understood this with a clarity that was both hopeful and sobering. Hopeful because it means there is a path forward. Sobering because the path is not easy. It requires courage, honesty, and the willingness to confront what has been avoided for years, perhaps decades. Recovery in the Jungian sense is not merely the absence of a substance. It is the presence of the self. It is the creation of a life that can hold meaning, purpose, and connection, so that the counterfeit spirits no longer seduce us. And yet Jung would be the first to say, this work is not done alone. The self is discovered not in isolation but in relationship, with others, with the world, and with the deeper currents of our own psyche. That is why, even today, people who find healing from addiction often describe it not only as getting sober, but as coming home. Home to themselves. Home to a life that feels whole, even with its imperfections. And this is where our journey begins, with the understanding that addiction is not the enemy, but the messenger. A dark, dangerous messenger, yes, but one carrying a letter from the soul. You have lost your way. Come back. If addiction is a messenger, then it is a messenger with a cruel sense of timing. It arrives not when we are ready to listen, but when we are most vulnerable. And it whispers its promises in a voice so soothing, so convincing, that we forget the price it demands. Carl Jung understood that the unconscious speaks in symbols. The bottle, the pill, the ritual, these are not random. They are the shapes taken by a deeper force inside us. A force that wants to be known, but that we fear to face. He called this the shadow. All the thoughts, emotions, and instincts we push away because they don't fit the image we have of ourselves. We like to think we are good, rational, in control, but the shadow remembers every shame we've buried, every rage we've denied, every need we've pretended not to have. And the shadow does not disappear just because we refuse to look at it. It waits, it watches, and it bargains. The bargain is simple. I will quiet your pain, it says, if you let me choose the method. At first, we accept without hesitation. The drink dulls the ache. The high erases the fear. The compulsion distracts from the emptiness. We tell ourselves it is harmless, that we are still in control. But control was never part of the bargain. Addiction begins as relief, but over time, the relief becomes a chain. We no longer choose the act chooses us. And the shadow smiles because now we belong to it. Jung saw this not as a moral failing, but as the natural consequence of neglecting the unconscious. What we refuse to make conscious will rule us from the dark. Addiction is one of the ways it asserts its power. This is why, in Jung's view, recovery is not simply about resisting temptation. It is about renegotiating the bargain and eventually ending it. That requires something more than willpower. It requires turning toward what we've spent our lives avoiding. But this turning is terrifying. To face the shadow is to risk seeing ourselves in ways that shatter the stories we've told about who we are. It means admitting that the rage, the grief, the despair we thought were not us are in fact heart of us. Jung would say this is the threshold of transformation. The old self, the one built on avoidance, cannot pass through. It must die so a fuller self can be born. This is where many people turn back. The substance feels safer than the unknown. Even when the substance is killing them, it feels more familiar than the abyss of self-discovery. But Jung's work insists that the abyss is not empty. It is the place where the self waits. And the self is not a fragile thing. It is the totality of who we are. The conscious and the unconscious, the light and the shadow. To unite with it is to feel whole, not perfect, but complete. Addiction thrives in fragmentation. It feeds on the distance between who we are and who we believe ourselves to be. The closer we come to bridging that gap, the weaker addiction's hold becomes. Still, we must be honest. The path toward wholeness does not promise bliss. In Jung's writings, individuation, the journey toward the self, often brings pain before it brings peace. It strips away illusions. It forces us to confront what we would rather forget. And yet, without this confrontation, the shadow will continue to rule from the dark, shaping our lives in ways we do not understand. Consider the addict who finally puts down the drink, only to find themselves consumed by anger or despair. The substance is gone, but the root of the addiction, the unresolved shadow, remains. Without addressing it, the person will either relapse or find a new compulsion to take its place. Jung's insight here is crucial. The goal is not to destroy the shadow, but to integrate it, to bring it into the light, where it can no longer manipulate us from behind the scenes. Integration means admitting, yes, this anger is mine. Yes, this fear is mine. Yes, this longing is mine. And then asking, what are you trying to teach me? This is the language the unconscious understands. Attention, respect, curiosity. When we approach it in this way, the shadow no longer needs to shout through the megaphone of addiction. It can speak in a softer voice, one we can actually hear without destroying ourselves. But here is the paradox. We cannot force this process. We cannot demand transformation on our schedule. The unconscious moves at its own pace, and it resists any attempt to dominate it. What we can do is create the conditions in which transformation becomes possible: honesty, self-reflection, openness to the unknown. In Jung's view, the real work is not about becoming addiction-free. It is about becoming whole. Addiction fades as a byproduct of that wholeness, not as its sole objective. This is why so many people who heal from addiction describe the experience not as a return to who they were, but as the discovery of someone they had never truly met, themselves. And yet, even in this discovery, there is humility, because wholeness is not a final state. It is a relationship with the self that deepens over time. The shadow does not vanish. It simply takes its rightful place as part of the whole, no longer running the show from the darkness. As Jung might say, the goal is not to banish the darkness, but to marry it with the light, so that life becomes a dance between the two. In this dance, addiction loses its power, because there is nothing left for it to fill. This is the bargain worth making, not with the shadow, but with the self. And that bargain says, I will face you, all of you, without running away. In return, you will make me whole, but the journey is not over. In fact, it has only just begun, because once the bargain with the self is made, we are invited into a deeper mystery, one that Jung believed lay at the very heart of human existence. And that is where we will go next. There comes a moment in the journey when you realize something unsettling. You were never actually searching for the substance. You were searching for what the substance promised to give you: peace, freedom, connection, meaning, but the substance was a counterfeit currency. It bought moments of relief at the cost of your deeper self. And like all false promises, it eventually asked for more than you could pay. Carl Jung understood this, not as a flaw of character, but as a sign of what he called the spiritual problem of modern life. In his eyes, addiction was not a disease in the conventional sense. It was a symptom of a deeper hunger, the hunger for the self. And here is the truth most people avoid. The self is not found by climbing higher, but by going deeper. It waits not in the places we've polished for public display, but in the inner landscapes we've abandoned. When Jung spoke of individuation, he meant the lifelong process of becoming the whole person you are meant to be. It is not about perfection. It is about integration, bringing every part of yourself into awareness, even the ones you would rather deny. Addiction, in this light, is not simply a habit to break. It is a call to awaken. It is the psyche's way of saying, you have drifted too far from your own center. Come back. But this return is not easy. It demands honesty about how far you have wandered. It demands the courage to face what you have used the addiction to avoid. For some, that might be grief, the loss that was never grieved. For others, it might be rage, the injustice that was never acknowledged. And for many, it is a profound loneliness, the absence of deep connection that no external comfort can replace. Jung would tell us that these are not obstacles to be removed, but gateways to be entered. Each emotion, each wound, contains a fragment of the self that has been waiting to be reclaimed. To turn toward them is to begin the work of wholeness. This is why so many attempts at recovery fail when they focus only on the surface. You can remove the drink, the pill, the behavior, but if you do not address the inner exile, the hunger will simply take another form. The outer compulsion may vanish, but the inner emptiness remains. The work, then, is not to destroy the hunger, but to feed it what it was truly asking for all along: meaning, connection, a life that feels like it belongs to you. But here is where the paradox deepens. You cannot receive these things by chasing them directly. You receive them by becoming the kind of person who can hold them without fear. And that means confronting the parts of yourself that you have treated as enemies. The shame that keeps you small. The fear that keeps you silent. The doubt that tells you you are unworthy. These are not enemies to be defeated, but exiles to be welcomed home. When you can look them in the eye and say, you belong here too, something remarkable happens. The grip of addiction begins to loosen, not because you are fighting harder, but because there is nothing left for it to control. Jung once said that what we call fate is often just the patterns we refuse to become conscious of. Addiction is one of those patterns, a destiny that repeats until it is understood. When you bring it into awareness, it stops being fate and starts becoming choice. And choice is the first breath of freedom. But freedom is not the end of the story. In Jung's vision, once you begin to reclaim the self, you are not meant to keep it locked away inside. You are meant to live it in the world, to bring your wholeness into your relationships, your work, your art, your presence. This is what gives your struggle meaning. This is what transforms your pain into something that can illuminate the path for others. Because the truth is, your journey is never just your own. Every time you meet your shadow, every time you reclaim a lost part of yourself, you expand the space in the world where others can do the same. Your healing becomes an invitation. And perhaps that is the final secret of addiction. It tries to convince you that you are alone. But in reality, your healing may be the lifeline someone else has been waiting for. This does not mean you must become a teacher, or a guide, or a savior. It means that by simply being whole, you change the space around you. And in a world filled with people still bargaining with their own shadows, that presence is rare and powerful. So where does this leave you? It leaves you with a choice to turn away from the call and return to the familiar chains, or to answer it and step into the unknown territory of the self. If you choose the second, know this: you will not walk in constant light. You will walk through valleys and shadows, through nights that feel endless. But you will also walk in a deeper kind of day, one that does not depend on the absence of darkness, but on the presence of wholeness. And when you stand in that place, the question will no longer be, how do I get rid of my addiction? But rather, how do I live a life so full, so connected, that addiction has no room to return? That is the true freedom Jung pointed toward, not the absence of struggle but the presence of self. Not a war against the shadow, but a reconciliation. Not a cure, but a homecoming. And perhaps, in the quiet after all the battles, you will find that the addiction was never the enemy. It was the alarm clock, the call in the night, the reminder that something essential was missing, and that it was time to go and find it. Before you go, I invite you to keep walking this path with me. There is another video waiting, one that will take you even deeper into this journey of understanding and transformation. But before you watch it, take a moment to sit with what you've heard here. Ask yourself, what did I discover about myself in these words? What insight emerged that I didn't expect? And most importantly, how will I train this insight so it becomes part of my living, breathing life? If something here spoke to you, I encourage you to write it in the comments. Not just for me, but for the others who will read your words and realize they are not alone. Your reflection might be the bridge someone else needs to take their next step. And when you're ready, let's continue together. Click through to the next video and keep walking toward the self you were always meant to be.